2026 Start with this plan. Welcome to Audiobook Sounds, Chasing Greatness, a space created for people who are done reacting to life, done chasing motivation that fades, and ready to move forward with clarity, discipline, and intention, especially as a new year approaches and decisions made now will quietly shape everything that follows. If you are listening to this, it is likely because you do not want to enter 2026 confused, distracted, or repeating the same cycles that consumed your time and energy before, but instead want a clear plan that helps you focus, simplify your priorities, and move deliberately in a world that constantly pulls attention in the wrong direction. This audiobook exists for that reason, not to pressure you, overwhelm you, or promise instant transformation, but to help you begin 2026 with structure, clarity, and a focused strategy that can survive distraction, emotion, and inconsistency, which is where most plans fail. Before we go any further, I invite you to engage with this channel by subscribing, liking, and staying connected, not as a favor, but as a decision that supports your growth, because every audiobook on Audiobook Sounds, Chasing Greatness is designed to reinforce clarity, discipline, and long-term thinking, and repeated exposure to these ideas helps anchor them into your daily decisions rather than leaving them as temporary inspiration. As you listen, allow yourself to slow down mentally, release unnecessary pressure, and focus fully on the ideas being shared, because planning your year with intention requires presence, not urgency. 2026 does not begin on the calendar, but in the way you choose to think, focus, and decide starting now. This is 2026 Start with this plan, and this is where direction replaces reaction, clarity replaces noise, and your year begins deliberately. Chapter 1. Why most people lose 2026 before it begins. Most people do not lose a year because they are lazy, incapable, or unmotivated, but because they enter the year without direction, clarity, or a plan that can withstand distraction, emotion, and inconsistency, which causes progress to collapse quietly long before they realize what has gone wrong. The loss of a year rarely happens suddenly, but gradually, through small compromises, unclear priorities, and emotional decision-making that feels harmless in the moment, yet compounds into stagnation over time. Many people begin a new year with excitement, ambition, and high expectations, believing that motivation alone will carry them forward, yet motivation is unstable by nature, and without structure, it fades quickly, leaving effort unsupported and direction unclear. The real danger is not lack of desire, but lack of alignment, because when intention is not anchored to a clear plan, energy is wasted reacting to circumstances rather than moving deliberately toward outcomes. Most people lose the year before it begins because they confuse goals with direction, setting vague resolutions without understanding how their days, habits, and attention will actually be structured to support them. Without clarity, distractions gain influence, urgency replaces intention, and decisions are made emotionally rather than strategically, causing the year to drift rather than progress. Another reason people lose the year early is because they attempt to change everything at once, overwhelming themselves with unrealistic expectations that cannot be sustained once life resumes its normal pressures. This overload leads to inconsistency, and inconsistency weakens self-trust, because when promises to oneself are repeatedly broken, confidence erodes quietly. People also lose the year by waiting too long to begin, convincing themselves that preparation requires more time, more clarity, or better conditions, when in reality, delay creates hesitation rather than readiness. The beginning of the year sets the tone for everything that follows, because habits formed early become patterns, and patterns become identity over time. When the year begins without structure, reaction becomes the default mode, and once reaction takes over, focus becomes fragmented and progress slows without notice. Many people underestimate how quickly distraction takes control when boundaries are not defined, allowing external demands, notifications, and noise to shape attention rather than intention. the loss of direction is often subtle, because effort continues, but effort without focus produces activity rather than advancement. This is why people often look back at the end of the year feeling confused, wondering how time passed without meaningful progress, even though they were busy almost every day. Another reason people lose the year early is because they fail to define what truly matters, allowing social expectations, comparison, and pressure to dictate priorities rather than personal values. When priorities are unclear, everything feels important, and when everything feels important, nothing receives the depth required to grow. The year is also lost when discipline is treated as punishment rather than protection, causing people to resist structure instead of using it to preserve energy and clarity. Without discipline, decisions are made based on mood, and mood fluctuates constantly, creating instability in effort and direction. People lose the year when they chase intensity instead of consistency, mistaking bursts of effort for progress, even though progress requires repetition sustained over time. Another common mistake is believing that clarity will arrive naturally, without effort, reflection, or planning, yet clarity must be built intentionally, not discovered passively. When clarity is absent, people fill the gap with distraction, urgency, or constant consumption, mistaking stimulation for movement. This chapter exists to reveal that the year is not lost through one big mistake, but through many small, unexamined choices that compound quietly. The purpose of this audiobook is not to overwhelm you with pressure, but to prevent this silent loss by offering structure before distraction takes hold. Understanding how people lose the year before it begins allows you to step outside that pattern, because awareness restores choice, and choice restores direction. You do not need to be perfect, faster, or more disciplined than everyone else, but you do need a plan that protects focus, simplifies decisions, and anchors effort consistently. This is why 2026 must begin with intention rather than reaction, with clarity rather than urgency, and with structure rather than motivation alone. Once you see how easily the year slips away without direction, you begin to respect planning not as control, but as self-respect. This chapter is not meant to create fear, but responsibility, because responsibility empowers rather than restricts. By recognizing how most people lose the year early, you give yourself the opportunity to do something different, not dramatically, but deliberately. And once direction is established early, momentum becomes easier to maintain, because effort finally has somewhere to go. Chapter 2. Clarity before goals. Before any goal is written down, before any plan is broken into steps, and before any pressure is placed on yourself to perform, achieve, or change, there is one requirement that determines whether the year will move forward with intention or collapse into frustration, and that requirement is clarity. Most people rush into goal setting because it feels productive, decisive, and motivating, yet goals created without clarity often become sources of stress rather than direction, because they are built on assumptions, emotion, and external expectations rather than understanding. Clarity is not excitement, and it is not motivation, but awareness, because awareness allows you to see what matters, what drains you, what deserves your energy, and what quietly distracts you without contributing to progress. When clarity is absent, goals multiply unnecessarily, priorities compete for attention, and effort becomes scattered, even when discipline is present, because discipline without clarity still moves in the wrong direction. Many people enter a new year with a long list of goals, believing that ambition requires complexity, yet complexity overwhelms focus, and overwhelmed focus leads to inconsistency. Clarity simplifies, not because life is simple, but because progress requires direction, and direction cannot exist when attention is divided between too many competing outcomes. Without clarity, goals are chosen based on comparison, pressure, or fear of being left behind, rather than alignment with values, capacity, and long-term direction. This is why many people abandon their goals early, not because they lack discipline, but because the goals never truly belonged to them in the first place. Clarity requires honest reflection, because it asks difficult questions, such as what you truly want to change, what you are willing to commit to consistently, and what you must let go of to move forward effectively. These questions are uncomfortable, which is why many people avoid clarity and jump straight into goal setting, because setting goals feels easier than examining priorities. Yet without clarity, goals become emotional commitments rather than strategic ones, and emotional commitments fluctuate with mood, energy, and circumstance. Clarity allows you to distinguish between what is important and what is merely urgent, because urgency demands attention loudly, while importance often requires patience and discipline to protect. When clarity is present, decisions become easier, because you are no longer negotiating with every opportunity, distraction, or demand, but measuring them against a clear internal standard. This internal standard reduces decision fatigue, because not everything requires deep consideration once direction is defined. Clarity also protects energy, because it prevents overcommitment, and overcommitment is one of the fastest paths to burnout and abandonment. Many people believe that doing more will move them forward faster, yet progress accelerates when effort is concentrated rather than scattered. Clarity tells you where to apply effort, how much effort is sustainable, and what level of consistency is realistic, which allows progress to compound steadily rather than collapse under pressure. Another reason clarity must come before goals is that clarity reveals constraints, such as time, energy, attention, and emotional capacity, and working within constraints produces more consistent results than ignoring them. Goals that ignore reality create friction, while goals aligned with clarity work with reality rather than against it. Clarity also reshapes expectations, because when you understand your current position honestly, you stop demanding immediate transformation and begin valuing steady improvement. This shift reduces frustration, because frustration often comes from expecting progress that the system cannot yet support. Clarity does not lower standards, but it stabilizes them, allowing ambition to be pursued without self-conflict. When clarity is present, goals become fewer but stronger, because each goal is anchored to purpose rather than impulse. These goals no longer compete for attention, but reinforce one another, creating momentum rather than tension. Clarity also allows you to recognize what not to pursue, and this is equally important, because focus is preserved not only by what you choose, but by what you intentionally ignore. Without clarity, distraction feels tempting, because direction is weak, yet with clarity, distraction loses its appeal, because it no longer aligns with what matters. This chapter exists to slow you down before you rush into setting goals, not to delay progress, but to protect it. Clarity is the foundation that allows goals to survive difficulty, distraction, and emotional fluctuation, because clarity remains stable even when motivation fades. As you move forward in this audiobook, understand that goals will come, plans will be built, and discipline will be required, but none of it will hold without clarity anchoring it. Clarity does not arrive suddenly, but is built through reflection, honesty, and willingness to simplify, and once it is established, progress becomes calmer, steadier, and more sustainable. This is why 2026 must begin with clarity before goals, because a clear direction turns effort into advancement, discipline into protection, and time into investment rather than waste. Once clarity is established, goals stop feeling heavy, because they are no longer burdens you carry, but directions you follow deliberately. And when clarity leads, the year no longer drifts, because it finally has a center. Chapter 3: The Focus Gap That Keeps People Stuck. The focus gap is the invisible space between intention and execution where most people lose momentum, not because they lack ambition or discipline, but because their attention is constantly divided, diluted, and redirected before effort has time to turn into meaningful progress. This gap exists when people know what they should be doing, understand what matters, and even feel motivated to act, yet struggle to sustain attention long enough for results to form, causing progress to reset repeatedly without ever compounding. Many people believe they are unfocused because they are lazy or undisciplined, yet in reality, their focus is being drained by constant interruption, overstimulation, and the habit of reacting to everything instead of committing deeply to one direction. The modern world widens this focus gap intentionally, rewarding speed over depth, reaction over reflection, and availability over alignment, which makes sustained focus feel unnatural, even though it is essential for progress. When attention is constantly pulled outward, the mind never fully engages with the task at hand, and without engagement, effort becomes shallow, mechanical, and exhausting rather than effective. This is why people often feel busy but unproductive, tired but unsatisfied, and active but stuck, because energy is being spent without direction and attention is being consumed without purpose. The focus gap is not created by one major distraction, but by many small ones that feel harmless in isolation, such as frequent checking, multitasking, background noise, and constant mental switching, which together fragment attention until depth becomes impossible. Each interruption may seem insignificant, yet collectively they prevent the mind from entering a state of concentration where clarity sharpens, judgment improves, and progress accelerates. Focus requires continuity, because continuity allows effort to build upon itself, and when continuity is broken repeatedly, progress is forced to restart rather than advance. This is why talent alone does not guarantee success, because talent without focus remains unused, and potential without sustained attention never materializes into outcomes. The focus gap also weakens confidence, because unfinished work, delayed progress, and repeated restarts create internal evidence that effort does not lead to completion, which slowly erodes self-trust. Self-trust is built when actions are carried through consistently, and consistency depends on attention that is protected long enough to finish what was started. When focus is weak, discipline feels heavy, because effort is scattered, yet when focus is strong, discipline feels supportive, because energy is applied precisely where it matters. Many people attempt to close the focus gap by working longer hours, pushing harder, or increasing pressure, yet pressure without focus only accelerates exhaustion rather than progress. The solution is not more effort, but better containment of attention, because focus determines the effectiveness of effort far more than intensity ever will. The focus gap also creates emotional instability, because divided attention increases stress, reduces patience, and amplifies frustration when results do not appear quickly. A focused mind is calmer not because life becomes easier, but because attention is anchored, reducing internal conflict and mental noise. Without focus, even simple tasks feel overwhelming, because attention is constantly negotiating between options, distractions, and unfinished responsibilities. This negotiation consumes mental energy, leaving less capacity for deep work, problem-solving, and creative thought. The focus gap keeps people stuck by preventing momentum, because momentum requires sustained movement in one direction, and sustained movement requires attention that is not constantly interrupted. Closing the focus gap begins with awareness, because you cannot protect what you do not notice, and most people underestimate how often their attention is being redirected throughout the day. Once awareness is established, boundaries become possible, not as rigid rules, but as intentional limits that preserve attention for what truly matters. Focus is not about isolation or extreme control, but about choosing deliberately what deserves your attention and what does not, and accepting that focus always requires exclusion. Every act of focus is also an act of elimination, because depth cannot exist where attention is spread thin. This chapter exists to reveal that being stuck is rarely about lack of ability, but about lack of sustained focus, and once this gap is recognized, it can be narrowed intentionally. As you move forward in this audiobook, understand that closing the focus gap does not require perfection, but consistency, not force, but structure, and not urgency, but patience. When focus is protected, effort compounds, clarity deepens, and progress begins to feel steady rather than chaotic. This is why focus must be treated as a priority, not an afterthought, because without it, even the best plan for 2026 will struggle to hold. Once the focus gap begins to close, movement becomes smoother, confidence stabilizes, and the feeling of being stuck slowly dissolves into direction. And when attention is finally anchored, progress no longer feels accidental, because it is being built deliberately, one focused decision at a time. Chapter 4. Choosing one direction for the year. One of the most difficult yet most powerful decisions you can make when planning a new year is choosing one clear direction to commit to fully, because progress does not require doing many things at once, but doing the right thing consistently without constantly changing course. Most people struggle not because they lack ambition, but because their ambition is scattered across too many goals, ideas, and responsibilities, all competing for attention, energy, and emotional investment, which prevents depth from forming in any one area. When direction is unclear or constantly shifting, effort becomes fragmented, and even disciplined people find themselves restarting repeatedly, wondering why they are busy yet not advancing. Choosing one direction for the year is not about limitation or settling for less, but about concentration, because concentration allows effort to compound, clarity to deepen, and confidence to grow through completion rather than constant pursuit. Many people fear committing to one direction because they worry about missing opportunities, making the wrong choice, or falling behind others, yet this fear often keeps them stuck in motion without progress. Direction does not remove uncertainty, but it reduces confusion, because once direction is chosen, decisions become simpler, distractions become easier to dismiss, and effort becomes more intentional. Without a clear direction, every opportunity feels tempting, every request feels urgent, and every distraction feels justified, because there is no internal standard to measure what truly matters. Choosing one direction provides that standard, allowing you to evaluate choices based on alignment rather than emotion or pressure. This does not mean ignoring all other areas of life, but it does mean deciding what deserves your deepest focus and highest consistency, because not everything can grow at the same pace simultaneously. Progress accelerates when effort is concentrated, because the mind performs best when it is allowed to stay with one objective long enough to develop skill, momentum, and confidence. When direction is scattered, learning remains shallow, habits remain inconsistent, and results remain unstable, even when effort is sincere. Many people confuse variety with growth, yet growth often requires repetition, patience, and tolerance for boredom, which only occur when direction is maintained long enough to matter. Choosing one direction also protects energy, because energy is depleted faster when constantly switching focus, adjusting plans, and managing competing priorities. A single direction allows systems, habits, and routines to align naturally, reducing decision fatigue and mental friction throughout the year. This alignment creates a sense of flow, where effort feels purposeful rather than forced, because actions are reinforcing the same outcome rather than pulling in opposite directions. Another reason choosing one direction is essential is that identity follows action, and repeated action in one direction shapes how you see yourself, strengthening self-trust and internal coherence. When identity is fragmented by conflicting goals, confidence weakens, because you are never fully invested long enough to see yourself succeed in one area. Commitment to one direction allows you to experience progress fully, which reinforces belief in your ability to follow through. Choosing direction requires clarity, honesty, and restraint, because it asks you to say no to good ideas in order to protect the one idea that matters most right now. This restraint is not loss, but strategy, because focus preserved today creates capacity for expansion later. Many people attempt to do everything at once, believing time is running out, yet this urgency often slows progress by spreading effort too thin to produce results. Direction does not mean permanence, but priority, because committing to one direction for the year does not lock you into it forever, but gives it enough time to develop meaningfully. Without this commitment, progress remains theoretical, always imagined, rarely realized. Choosing one direction also simplifies planning, because once direction is clear, goals, habits, and schedules naturally align to support it. This reduces internal conflict, because effort is no longer divided between competing outcomes that demand different behaviors and mindsets. When direction is chosen, discipline becomes easier to apply, because there is clarity about what discipline is serving. This chapter exists to challenge the belief that doing more leads to faster results, and to replace it with the understanding that doing less with greater focus produces deeper, more sustainable progress. The year does not reward those who chase many paths briefly, but those who walk one path deliberately long enough to reach depth. As you move forward, understand that choosing one direction is not about narrowing your life, but about strengthening it, because depth creates mastery, and mastery creates options. Once direction is chosen, the noise of comparison fades, because your attention is no longer measuring itself against others, but aligning with your own path. This clarity creates calm, because you are no longer negotiating with every distraction or opportunity, but moving forward with intention. When you choose one direction for the year, progress stops feeling accidental, because effort is finally anchored to a clear destination. This is how momentum is built, how confidence stabilizes, and how 2026 becomes intentional rather than reactive. And once direction is chosen and protected, the rest of the plan begins to work, because focus finally has somewhere to go. Chapter 5. The daily structure that protects focus. Focus is not protected by intention alone, but by structure, because even the clearest direction will eventually collapse if daily life is left unorganized, reactive, and vulnerable to distraction, which is why structure becomes the silent force that determines whether focus survives pressure or fades under it. Many people believe structure limits freedom, yet the opposite is true, because structure removes unnecessary decisions, reduces mental friction, and preserves attention for what truly matters, allowing progress to unfold without constant negotiation. Without daily structure, focus must rely on willpower, and willpower is unstable, fluctuating with energy, emotion, and circumstance, which makes consistency difficult to sustain across an entire year. Structure exists to protect focus from these fluctuations, creating stability even when motivation disappears, clarity feels distant, or life becomes unpredictable. A well-designed day does not demand perfection, but alignment, because alignment ensures that your most important priorities receive attention before distractions take control. When days are unstructured, urgency dictates behavior, causing people to react to messages, demands, and noise before investing energy in meaningful work, which gradually trains the mind to prioritize reaction over intention. This reactive pattern weakens focus over time, because attention is constantly pulled outward rather than directed inward toward purpose. Daily structure reverses this pattern by deciding in advance what deserves focus, reducing the likelihood that distractions will hijack attention. Structure is not about rigid schedules, but about intentional placement of effort, because when you know when and where focus will be applied, resistance decreases and follow-through improves. The mind performs best when it knows what is expected of it, and structure provides that expectation clearly, reducing hesitation and delay. A structured day protects focus by establishing boundaries around time, attention, and energy, ensuring that your most important work is not left to chance. Without these boundaries, focus is constantly compromised by interruptions that feel urgent but contribute little to long-term progress. Daily structure also reduces decision fatigue, because when key actions are pre-decided, mental energy is preserved rather than wasted on repeated choices. This preservation of energy is essential for focus, because tired minds seek distraction, while rested and organized minds tolerate depth more easily. Structure creates rhythm, and rhythm creates momentum, because repeated patterns reduce resistance and allow habits to form naturally. When habits align with direction, focus becomes automatic rather than forced, and progress becomes steadier rather than emotional. Many people attempt to protect focus by working longer hours. Yet longer hours without structure often increase distraction rather than reduce it, because fatigue weakens attention. Structure emphasizes quality of focus over quantity of time, recognizing that deep engagement produces more progress than extended effort without clarity. A structured day also clarifies priorities, because it forces you to decide what matters before the day begins, rather than allowing distractions to decide for you. This proactive approach strengthens focus, because attention is guided rather than negotiated. Structure protects focus by creating predictable windows for deep work, reflection, rest, and recovery, acknowledging that focus cannot be sustained indefinitely without renewal. Rest is not the opposite of focus, but a requirement for it, because exhausted minds struggle to concentrate and disciplined minds understand the value of recovery. Without planned rest, focus deteriorates quietly, making distraction more tempting and discipline more difficult to maintain. Structure also provides containment, because when tasks are assigned to specific times or contexts, the mind can release them when they are not active, reducing mental clutter. This reduction in mental clutter improves focus, because attention is no longer fragmented by unresolved responsibilities. Daily structure teaches patience, because progress is distributed across time rather than demanded immediately, allowing consistency to replace urgency. It also teaches restraint, because structure limits overcommitment, preventing burnout caused by unrealistic expectations. A well-structured day balances effort and recovery, focus and flexibility, direction and adjustment, allowing focus to remain sustainable across weeks and months rather than collapsing under pressure. Structure does not eliminate unpredictability, but it absorbs it, providing a stable foundation that prevents disruption from derailing progress entirely. When disruptions occur, structure allows you to return quickly to focus rather than restarting from confusion. This ability to return is more important than uninterrupted perfection, because consistency is built through recovery rather than avoidance of disruption. Daily structure also reinforces identity, because repeated adherence to a plan strengthens self-trust and confidence in your ability to follow through. Self-trust supports focus, because when you believe in your ability to execute, resistance decreases and attention stabilizes. Structure protects focus by aligning environment with intention, reducing exposure to unnecessary distractions and reinforcing desired behaviors. Environment influences attention quietly, and structure ensures that environment supports focus rather than undermines it. As structure becomes consistent, focus becomes less effortful, because the mind adapts to patterns that support depth. This adaptation allows progress to feel calmer, steadier, and more controlled, even when challenges arise. This chapter exists to show that focus is not protected by motivation or discipline alone, but by daily systems that reduce friction and preserve clarity. When structure is established, focus no longer depends on mood, because the day itself guides attention. This is how progress becomes reliable rather than accidental, because focus is supported rather than constantly defended. As you move forward, understand that structure is not something you build once and forget, but something you refine as awareness deepens and direction evolves. When daily structure protects focus, effort compounds, discipline stabilizes, and 2026 becomes intentional rather than reactive. This is where planning turns into execution, and where focus stops feeling fragile and begins to feel secure. Chapter 6: Discipline without burnout. Discipline is often misunderstood as force, pressure, and relentless effort. Yet discipline that relies on force eventually collapses into burnout, resentment, and avoidance, which is why the ability to practice discipline without exhausting yourself becomes essential for sustaining progress throughout an entire year. Many people begin the year with aggressive routines, strict rules, and unrealistic expectations, believing that intensity equals commitment, yet intensity without recovery creates imbalance, and imbalance eventually destroys consistency. Burnout does not occur because people work too hard for too long, but because they work without alignment, rest, and realistic structure, forcing effort to compensate for poor design. True discipline is not about pushing endlessly, but about protecting energy, because energy is the fuel that allows focus, patience, and consistency to exist over time. When discipline is built on punishment, people associate progress with suffering, making resistance stronger and follow-through weaker as the year progresses. Discipline without burnout begins with understanding that consistency matters more than intensity, because small, repeatable actions sustained across months produce more progress than extreme effort applied briefly. The purpose of discipline is not to extract maximum output every day, but to ensure steady execution that can be maintained even when motivation fades or life becomes unpredictable. Many people burn out because they treat discipline as a temporary sprint rather than a long-term rhythm, expecting immediate transformation instead of gradual alignment. A disciplined life must be designed with recovery built into it, because recovery preserves clarity, focus, and emotional stability, which are required for long-term execution. Rest is not the opposite of discipline, but part of it, because disciplined individuals understand that rest protects progress rather than delaying it. Burnout also occurs when people attempt to change too many behaviors at once, overwhelming attention and emotional capacity, which creates internal resistance rather than momentum. Discipline becomes sustainable when it is focused on a small number of non-negotiable actions that align with direction, rather than a long list of rules that compete for energy. When discipline is simplified, it becomes easier to maintain, because attention is not constantly negotiating between competing expectations. Discipline without burnout also requires flexibility, because rigid systems break under pressure, while adaptable systems absorb disruption without collapsing. Flexibility does not mean lowering standards, but adjusting methods, allowing progress to continue even when conditions change. Many people abandon discipline after setbacks because they interpret disruption as failure, yet disciplined individuals understand that recovery matters more than perfection. The ability to return quickly after interruption is what sustains discipline across the year, not the ability to avoid interruption entirely. Burnout is often accelerated by emotional discipline failures, such as self-criticism, comparison, and unrealistic timelines, which drain motivation and weaken self-trust. Discipline must be supported by self-respect, because effort fueled by self-respect is steady, while effort fueled by self-judgment is volatile. When discipline is practiced with self-respect, effort feels purposeful rather than punishing, making consistency more natural. Another cause of burnout is attaching identity to output, believing that worth depends on productivity, which creates pressure that erodes enjoyment and patience. Discipline without burnout requires separating effort from worth, allowing progress to be measured by alignment and consistency rather than constant achievement. This separation reduces anxiety, because mistakes no longer threaten identity, and adjustment becomes possible without emotional collapse. Discipline also becomes sustainable when expectations are realistic, because unrealistic expectations create constant disappointment, even when progress is occurring. Realistic expectations allow discipline to feel rewarding, because progress is recognized rather than dismissed as insufficient. Burnout often hides behind the belief that slowing down equals failure, yet slowing down strategically preserves momentum rather than stopping it. Discipline is not weakened by pacing, but strengthened by it, because pacing allows effort to be distributed evenly rather than concentrated unsustainably. Discipline without burnout also depends on environment, because environments that encourage distraction, chaos, and overstimulation demand more willpower than is reasonable. Designing an environment that supports focus reduces the effort required to stay disciplined, preserving energy for meaningful work. The most disciplined individuals are not those who force themselves constantly, but those who remove unnecessary friction from their lives. When friction is reduced, discipline becomes less visible, because action flows naturally rather than being forced repeatedly. This chapter exists to redefine discipline not as harsh control, but as intelligent self-management, where effort is protected, energy is preserved, and progress remains sustainable. Discipline without burnout allows you to show up consistently without resentment, exhaustion, or collapse, which is essential for executing a year-long plan successfully. As you move forward, understand that discipline is not something you prove once, but something you practice daily with patience, awareness, and restraint. When discipline is practiced this way, it supports focus, protects clarity, and allows 2026 to unfold with steadiness rather than strain. This is how discipline becomes a foundation rather than a burden, and how progress becomes durable rather than fragile. Chapter 7: Managing Distraction, Urgency, and Noise. Distraction, urgency, and noise are not separate problems, but interconnected forces that compete aggressively for your attention, and unless they are managed deliberately, they will quietly override even the strongest plans, the clearest intentions, and the most disciplined routines throughout the year. Distraction is the pull on your attention, urgency is the pressure to respond immediately, and noise is the constant background stimulation that keeps the mind restless, reactive, and unable to settle into focus, and together they form the environment most people live inside without questioning. The reason so many plans fail is not because they are poorly designed, but because they are executed in environments that reward reaction instead of intention, making focus feel unnatural and calm feel unproductive. Managing these forces does not require escaping the world, eliminating responsibility, or becoming rigid, but it does require awareness, boundaries, and the willingness to choose depth over immediacy. Distraction becomes powerful when attention is unguarded, because the mind naturally moves towards stimulation when direction is weak or unclear, and even small interruptions can derail progress when they occur repeatedly. Urgency amplifies distraction by creating the illusion that everything must be handled immediately, even when most demands have little long-term impact, causing attention to fragment under constant pressure. Noise sustains this cycle by filling every quiet moment with input, leaving no space for reflection, planning, or deep engagement, which slowly erodes the ability to concentrate. When the mind is never allowed to rest in silence, focus becomes uncomfortable, patience weakens, and depth feels demanding, even though depth is where progress actually forms. Managing distraction begins with recognizing that not everything deserves immediate attention, and that attention given impulsively is attention lost permanently. Urgency must be questioned rather than obeyed, because many urgent signals are manufactured by systems designed to keep you responsive rather than effective. When urgency is left unexamined, it trains the mind to prioritize reaction over direction, creating a pattern where focus is constantly interrupted before it can produce results. Noise reinforces this pattern by normalizing constant stimulation, making stillness feel unproductive and focus feel restrictive. Managing noise does not mean eliminating all input, but being intentional about what you allow into your mental environment, because input shapes attention, and attention shapes behavior. The mind becomes what it repeatedly consumes, and when consumption is chaotic, focus becomes unstable. Managing distraction, urgency, and noise requires redefining productivity because productivity is not responsiveness, but progress toward what matters. When productivity is measured by speed and availability, focus is sacrificed. Yet when productivity is measured by alignment and completion, focus becomes essential. Boundaries become critical at this stage, not as rigid rules, but as filters that protect attention, deciding in advance what is allowed to interrupt and what must wait. Without boundaries, every distraction feels justified, and without justification, focus dissolves. Managing urgency requires developing tolerance for delayed response, because the ability to pause before reacting restores control over attention. This pause does not slow progress, but improves it, because thoughtful responses reduce error, stress, and wasted effort. Noise must be managed by creating intentional quiet, even briefly, because quiet allows the mind to settle, organize, and regain clarity. Quiet is not emptiness, but space, and space allows focus to emerge naturally rather than being forced. Many people avoid quiet because it reveals discomfort, unfinished thoughts, or unresolved priorities, yet this discomfort is informative rather than harmful. When quiet is avoided, distraction fills the gap, and unresolved issues remain unresolved. Managing noise also means being selective about information, because excessive input creates mental clutter that competes with focus. More information does not equal more clarity, and clarity often improves when input is reduced. Managing these forces together requires consistency, because occasional focus cannot overcome constant distraction. Small, repeated acts of attention protection gradually retrain the mind, making focus feel more natural over time. This retraining does not happen instantly, because the mind must unlearn habits of constant switching and stimulation. Patience is required, because early attempts at focus may feel uncomfortable, boring, or mentally demanding, yet this discomfort fades as attention stabilizes. Managing distraction, urgency, and noise is not about control, but about choice, because you cannot eliminate these forces, but you can decide how much influence they have. When attention is chosen deliberately, effort becomes more effective, decisions become clearer, and progress becomes steadier. This chapter exists to shift responsibility back to awareness, because once you see how these forces operate, they lose much of their power. Distraction becomes manageable when it is anticipated, urgency becomes negotiable when it is questioned, and noise becomes less dominant when quiet is protected. As you move forward, understand that focus is not fragile, but it must be defended consistently, because the environment will not protect it for you. Managing distraction, urgency, and noise is not a one-time decision, but a daily practice, reinforced through boundaries, reflection, and restraint. When these practices are applied steadily, focus strengthens, stress decreases, and progress begins to feel intentional rather than reactive. This is how you prevent the year from being consumed by noise, urgency, and distraction, and instead allow it to unfold with clarity, direction, and control. And once these forces are managed, the plan you are building finally has the space it needs to work. Chapter 8. Adjusting the plan without quitting. One of the most important skills for executing any long-term plan is the ability to adjust without quitting, because no year unfolds exactly as imagined, and progress is rarely linear, predictable, or free from disruption, even when clarity and discipline are present. Most people do not fail because their plan was wrong, but because they expected the plan to work without resistance, interruption, or emotional challenge, and when reality did not match expectation, they interpreted friction as failure instead of feedback. Adjustment is not a sign of weakness or indecision, but a sign of intelligence and self-awareness, because it acknowledges that progress requires responsiveness to reality rather than blind persistence. Quitting often disguises itself as self-honesty, when in reality it is avoidance fueled by frustration, disappointment, or unrealistic expectations, and learning to recognize this distinction is critical for sustaining momentum. When progress slows, stalls, or becomes uncomfortable, many people assume they made the wrong choice, rather than considering that growth naturally includes periods of resistance, uncertainty, and recalibration. Adjustment begins with reflection rather than reaction, because reacting emotionally often leads to abandoning direction entirely, while reflection allows you to identify what needs refinement without discarding the entire plan. A plan is meant to guide effort, not trap you in rigidity, and rigidity breaks under pressure, while adaptability absorbs stress and preserves direction. Many people quit not because they cannot continue, but because they refuse to adjust expectations, timelines, or methods, clinging to an imagined version of progress rather than responding to what is actually happening. Adjusting the plan may involve slowing down, simplifying routines, reducing scope, or refining priorities, none of which represent failure, but rather alignment. Progress often resumes not when effort increases, but when friction is reduced, and adjustment is the process through which friction is identified and removed. Another reason people quit prematurely is because they attach their identity to outcomes, believing that setbacks reflect personal inadequacy, rather than understanding that setbacks are normal signals within any meaningful process. When identity is separated from outcome, adjustment becomes easier, because learning replaces self-judgment and curiosity replaces frustration. Adjustment requires emotional discipline, because it asks you to tolerate discomfort without abandoning direction and to remain present even when progress feels slower than expected. This tolerance is what transforms difficulty into refinement rather than collapse. Quitting feels relieving in the short term because it removes pressure immediately, yet it creates long-term dissatisfaction because direction is lost and momentum resets. Adjustment, on the other hand, maintains continuity, because even when pace changes, movement continues, and continuity is what allows progress to compound over time. Many people quit because they believe consistency means perfection, yet consistency actually means return, because the ability to resume after disruption matters far more than uninterrupted execution. Adjustment teaches you how to return without shame, self-criticism, or overcorrection, allowing the plan to remain alive rather than abandoned. The plan for 2026 must be flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances, energy levels, responsibilities, and unforeseen challenges, because life does not pause to accommodate intention. When flexibility is built into the plan, disruption becomes manageable rather than catastrophic. Adjustment also strengthens self-trust, because each successful recalibration proves that you can respond intelligently to difficulty without losing direction. This self-trust reduces fear during future challenges, because you know that setbacks do not require quitting, only recalibration. Many people mistake momentum for speed, yet true momentum is stability, because stable progress continues even when pace fluctuates. Adjustment protects momentum by preventing emotional decisions from overriding long-term direction. This chapter exists to redefine success not as flawless execution, but as sustained commitment paired with intelligent adaptation. When you adjust without quitting, progress becomes resilient because it no longer depends on ideal conditions to continue. As you move forward, understand that every meaningful plan will require adjustment, because reality will always test clarity, discipline, and patience. These tests are not obstacles to the plan, but part of the process that strengthens it. Adjustment ensures that effort remains aligned, energy remains protected, and focus remains intact, even when circumstances change. When adjustment replaces quitting, the year stops restarting, because momentum is preserved rather than reset. This is how plans survive beyond initial enthusiasm, how discipline remains sustainable, and how progress continues quietly despite difficulty. By learning to adjust without quitting, you give your plan the time it needs to mature, refine, and produce results that cannot be rushed. This is how 2026 becomes a year of execution rather than abandonment, because direction is protected even when the path changes. Chapter 9. Measuring Progress the Right Way. Most people lose motivation, confidence, and direction not because they are failing, but because they are measuring progress incorrectly, using standards that distort reality, create unnecessary pressure, and hide real growth that is happening beneath the surface. When progress is measured only by visible outcomes such as money, recognition, speed, or external validation, effort begins to feel unrewarding during the long periods where results are still forming, causing people to question themselves, their plan, and their ability to continue. The problem is not that outcomes do not matter, but that outcomes are delayed, because they reflect accumulated behavior rather than daily effort, and when people expect immediate evidence of success, they become discouraged long before progress has time to mature. Measuring progress the right way begins with understanding the difference between leading indicators and lagging indicators, because behavior, consistency, and focus lead outcomes, while outcomes arrive later as a consequence. Most people track lagging indicators only, such as results, numbers, and milestones, while ignoring leading indicators like daily execution, attention control, and consistency, which creates the illusion of stagnation even when progress is occurring. When leading indicators are ignored, people assume nothing is working, even though foundations are being built quietly through repeated effort. This misunderstanding causes premature quitting, unnecessary changes, and emotional decisions that disrupt momentum. Measuring progress correctly requires shifting attention from what has not yet appeared to what is being practiced consistently, because consistency is the earliest and most reliable signal that progress is underway. Progress should first be measured by whether you are showing up when planned, protecting focus when distracted, and returning quickly after disruption, because these behaviors determine whether outcomes will eventually appear. When progress is measured through behavior rather than results, patience increases because effort feels meaningful even before visible success arrives. This shift reduces emotional volatility because self-worth is no longer tied to short-term outcomes that fluctuate unpredictably. Measuring progress the right way also requires tracking alignment rather than intensity, because working harder does not always mean working better, and exhaustion is not evidence of effectiveness. Alignment asks whether your daily actions reflect your chosen direction, priorities, and values, rather than whether you feel busy or productive. When alignment is present, progress is occurring, even if results are not yet visible, because effort is being applied in the right direction. Another mistake people make is comparing their progress to others, which distorts perception and undermines confidence, because comparison ignores context, timing, resources, and unseen effort. Measuring progress the right way is personal, because progress depends on where you started, what you committed to, and what you are capable of sustaining consistently. Comparison shifts attention away from your own execution and places it on outcomes you cannot control, weakening focus and increasing frustration. Progress should also be measured by stability, because stability indicates that habits, routines, and discipline are becoming sustainable rather than forced. When progress is unstable, characterized by extreme highs followed by collapse, it is often a sign that systems need refinement rather than increased effort. Stability reveals whether progress can survive normal life pressures, which is essential for long-term success. Another important measure of progress is recovery time, because the speed at which you return to focus after disruption matters more than avoiding disruption entirely. Fast recovery indicates resilience, adaptability, and strong systems, while slow recovery signals emotional attachment, unrealistic expectations, or fragile discipline. Measuring recovery instead of perfection prevents discouragement, because it reframes setbacks as part of the process rather than proof of failure. Progress should also be measured by clarity, because clarity improves decision-making, reduces hesitation, and strengthens confidence, even when outcomes lag behind. When clarity increases, fewer decisions feel overwhelming, distractions lose power, and effort feels more deliberate, all of which signal real progress. Many people overlook internal progress because it is not visible, yet internal progress determines external outcomes over time. Measuring progress the right way requires reflection, because reflection turns experience into feedback rather than frustration. Without reflection, effort repeats blindly, yet with reflection, effort improves intelligently. Reflection allows you to notice what is working, what is draining energy, and what needs adjustment, preventing unnecessary quitting or overcorrection. Progress should also be measured by emotional regulation, because the ability to remain calm, patient, and deliberate under pressure indicates growth that cannot be rushed or faked. When emotional reactions decrease and thoughtful responses increase, progress is occurring at a deeper level. Another measure of progress is identity shift, because when behaviors begin to feel natural rather than forced, and discipline feels supportive rather than punishing, alignment is strengthening. Identity shifts slowly, yet it is one of the strongest indicators that change is becoming permanent rather than temporary. Measuring progress the right way prevents burnout, because it allows effort to feel acknowledged even during slow phases, reducing the urge to abandon direction prematurely. It also strengthens self-trust, because consistent execution builds evidence that you can rely on yourself regardless of mood or outcome. When progress is measured correctly, motivation becomes less necessary, because clarity and consistency provide their own momentum. This chapter exists to correct distorted standards that cause people to quit too early, undervalue their effort, and misinterpret the natural pace of growth. When you measure progress through alignment, consistency, recovery, and clarity, the year stops feeling uncertain, because you can see evidence of movement even before results appear. This approach transforms patience from something you endure into something you practice deliberately. As you move forward, understand that progress rarely announces itself loudly, but reveals itself quietly through stability, focus, and repeated execution. When progress is measured the right way, confidence stabilizes, effort feels worthwhile, and the plan remains intact long enough to succeed. This is how momentum is preserved, how discouragement loses its power, and how 2026 becomes a year of steady advancement rather than emotional swings. And when progress is measured with awareness rather than pressure, success becomes something you build deliberately, not something you chase anxiously. Chapter 10. Living the Plan All Through 2026. Living the plan all through 2026 does not mean maintaining perfect execution, constant motivation, or uninterrupted focus, but rather sustaining alignment through awareness, discipline, and intelligent adjustment as the year unfolds with its natural challenges, distractions, and changes. A plan only becomes powerful when it moves beyond intention and into identity, because identity determines behavior far more reliably than motivation, and living the plan requires allowing it to shape how you think, decide, and respond on ordinary days, not just during moments of inspiration. Many people treat plans as temporary structures meant to be followed briefly and then abandoned once resistance appears, yet living the plan means treating it as a framework you return to repeatedly, even after disruption, because consistency is built through return rather than perfection. Throughout the year, there will be periods of clarity and momentum, as well as periods of fatigue, uncertainty, and distraction, and the difference between execution and abandonment is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of commitment to realign when focus drifts. Living the plan requires patience, because progress rarely moves at a constant pace, and demanding continuous acceleration often leads to frustration, burnout, or impulsive decisions that weaken long-term direction. Patience allows effort to compound naturally, because when pressure is removed, consistency becomes easier to maintain, and consistency is what allows results to form quietly over time. The plan must be lived daily through small decisions, such as choosing focus over distraction, structure over chaos, and intention over reaction, because these choices shape outcomes more reliably than occasional bursts of effort. When the plan is lived rather than forced, discipline feels supportive rather than restrictive, because it exists to protect clarity, energy, and progress instead of demanding constant sacrifice. Living the plan also requires emotional awareness, because emotions fluctuate throughout the year, and without awareness, emotional states can hijack decisions, causing unnecessary deviation from direction. By acknowledging emotions without allowing them to dictate behavior, you preserve alignment even when motivation is low or circumstances are challenging. The plan must also evolve as the year progresses, because growth changes perspective, priorities, and capacity, and rigid adherence without reflection leads to misalignment rather than mastery. Living the plan does not mean refusing to adjust, but adjusting intelligently while preserving direction, ensuring that refinement strengthens execution rather than replacing it. Throughout 2026, distractions will compete for your attention relentlessly, and living the plan means repeatedly choosing what matters most, even when urgency, noise, and comparison attempt to pull you away. This repeated choice builds internal stability, because each act of alignment reinforces self-trust, and self-trust reduces hesitation, overthinking, and emotional decision-making. Living the plan also means accepting that some days will feel productive and others will feel slow, yet both contribute to progress when direction is maintained. Progress is not negated by slower days, because consistency over time outweighs daily performance, and stability matters more than intensity. The plan becomes most valuable during difficult periods, because it provides structure when clarity feels distant and discipline feels heavy, allowing you to continue moving forward without relying on emotion. Living the plan requires reflection, because reflection ensures that effort remains aligned and that lessons are extracted from experience rather than repeated unconsciously. Reflection turns action into insight, and insight strengthens future decisions, preventing unnecessary frustration and repeated mistakes. As the year progresses, living the plan shifts focus away from proving results and toward sustaining habits, protecting focus, and maintaining direction, because outcomes eventually follow consistent behavior. This shift reduces anxiety, because effort is no longer evaluated daily against outcomes that take time to appear, but against alignment that can be practiced immediately. Living the plan all through 2026 also means resisting the urge to restart unnecessarily, because constant restarting resets momentum and weakens confidence, while continuation preserves progress even when pace changes. When setbacks occur, the plan reminds you that recovery matters more than regret, and returning matters more than restarting. The most successful execution of any plan is quiet, because it does not rely on dramatic moments, but on steady adherence that often goes unnoticed until results emerge. Living the plan builds a rhythm where effort feels normal, focus feels natural, and discipline feels integrated rather than imposed. By the end of the year, what will matter most is not how intense your effort was, but how consistently you remained aligned with your direction despite distraction, emotion, and uncertainty. Living the plan transforms 2026 from a year you react to into a year you navigate deliberately, because direction remains intact even when conditions change. This chapter exists to remind you that the plan does not end once it is understood, but begins once it is lived, day after day, decision after decision, without urgency or force. When the plan is lived fully, progress becomes durable, confidence stabilizes, and focus strengthens naturally. This is how a year becomes meaningful, not through constant achievement, but through sustained alignment. And as 2026 unfolds, living the plan will not require perfection, but presence, not pressure, but patience, and not noise, but clarity. This is how the plan survives the year, and this is how the year finally works for you rather than against you. As this audiobook comes gently to a close, there is no need to rush forward, analyze immediately, or search for the next step, because everything you need to begin has already been placed quietly in front of you through clarity, direction, and intention. The plan you have just listened to is not meant to be completed once and forgotten, but returned to repeatedly, especially during moments when focus weakens, urgency increases, or direction begins to feel unclear. You may choose to pause here and reflect, allowing these ideas to settle naturally into your thinking, or you may allow the audiobook to continue looping, not because something was missed, but because repetition deepens understanding and clarity strengthens when ideas are revisited calmly. There is no finish line being crossed here, only continuity, because real progress is built through return rather than restart, and alignment is maintained through awareness rather than pressure. As this audiobook gently transitions back to the beginning, allow it to feel natural, as though you are not starting over, but re-entering the plan with a clearer mind and steadier focus. Each time you listen again, you may notice something different, not because the words have changed, but because you have, and growth often reveals itself through perspective rather than intensity. Welcome back to Audiobook Sounds, Chasing Greatness, a space created to help you think clearly, move deliberately, and protect focus in a world that constantly pulls attention away from what matters. And as the opening words return, let this not feel like an ending followed by a beginning, but a continuation, because 2026 does not begin on a calendar, but in the way you choose to think, focus, and decide starting now.